cutting edge of urban mobility inside several of the most ambitious transit-led developments in a generation. So yeah, we're going to have a look at some case studies here and some dreams and views and thoughts on transport, and there's all sorts of issues going on there. To kick things off, the CLARA vision, a privately funded high-speed rail as a catalyst for the development of new smart cities. We've been talking about this in this country for a long time. To share his views, Nick Cleary, the chairman of Consolidated Land and Rail Australia, will be joining us. Nick is the founding member and is proposing to build a privately funded high-speed rail link between Sydney and Melbourne, opening up the development of 8 new greenfield cities that are smart, sustainable and highly connected. So Nick will be talking for 10 minutes on this. Can you please make him welcome to the stage?
Yeah, Nick Cleary is my name. I'm the chairman of CLARA and CEO of CLARA, Consolidated Land and Rail Australia, and we've got a grand vision, as you've been made aware of. That's happening. And where our plan is to build the world's most livable, sustainable and connected cities, building numerous cities between Sydney and Melbourne and connecting those cities by high-speed rail. Obviously, the opportunity comes about because we've got the technology now to overcome the tyranny of distance, which has been a burden to the decentralisation of Australia for many generations. But today, I've been asked to talk mainly about our mobility issues and on the cutting edge of urban mobility. And I want to talk about a number of areas that will touch on our new cities that we are aiming to build. It'll involve high-speed rail, of course, but trackless trams play a critical part of that. Mobility as a service is key, cycling and walkability. Also, we'll touch on a bit later digital connectivity and freight networks. Our high-speed rail is about delivering technology that does overcome the tyranny of distance. Our line will be 193 kilometres from Melbourne to Greater Shepparton is the study we've currently done with the federal government, and that's to deliver that time frame in around about 32 minutes from our city into the CBD of Melbourne. Utilising new technologies, or existing technologies I should say, that deliver at a speed at 450 kilometres an hour, delivering on those travel times, making new cities 200 kilometres out of Melbourne, only 32 minutes from the CBD. Therefore, changing the conversation as to where people may choose to live and work, and open up the opportunity for decentralisation in Australia at scale. These cities will be home to 400,000 people, and they have to get around within those cities themselves. Trams are obviously a wonderful opportunity to do that, but if we look at that cutting edge, it's the trackless trams and a trackless tram network which puts all of our residents, over 160,000 dwellings, within 300 to 400 metres of a trackless tram station or point to pick up on, and therefore only 10 minutes from pretty much any point in the city. Mobility as a service is key. We want to discourage the private ownership of cars within a city, but you only can do that if people can get on an app and bring a car to them or to their house within 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes. That will then again change that conversation and the need for how we develop and deliver new technology and new systems to enable people to get away from that private ownership of cars, which changes the way we build buildings and have to deliver parking and all those sorts of things in a private context, but also in regards to the ability to get around. Cycleways are obviously key. We want people to be active. Active transport is absolutely key, but you've got to have the networks to do it. You've got to start from the very beginning to enable people to be able to get around in a safe, friendly and able manner. It means that it's going to be en masse and certainly very available by e-bikes and other mechanisms to enable people to get around and be included as part of an overall cities as a service type model. We've begun the planning with that very much front and centre, which leads obviously to that active mode of walkability. We need walkability in everything that we do, because if people are within 300 to 400 metres of those other transport modes, then we know that they're going to be able to get out and utilise that no matter what the weather, and we've seen that in Copenhagen, we've seen that in other parts of the world. Where those opportunities are on offer, people will certainly take that. We want to get people out of the cars, we want to get them back connecting with each other, because that's the absolute key to a better society and a more livable society as we continue on. But we can't forget the other areas of mobility or connectivity, and that is all about digital connection. It's also about making sure that people are in a way that they can get goods delivered, especially when we're talking about a city of over 400,000 people. We need to be able to deliver goods, and the way we're talking about that is through a subterranean freight network, which when you're looking at cities from scratch, it's absolutely possible. So utilising an underground system of networks to hubs that will provide that last mile journey through autonomous or doesn't have to be autonomous, but other vehicles to take it to the consumer, changes the way the on-surface transport and traffic has to work, and therefore opens up that opportunity for people to move around in a safer, more secure, but also the whole city being much more sufficient going forward. Digital connectivity is obviously key. We want to move forward with one of the most connected cities, be one of the first fully 5G networked cities, which creates an abundance of challenges within itself. Having Wi-Fi points everywhere and the opportunity to not just work from home, but have a truly connected city that enables you to not just have smart bins and smart cars, but also have a smart life, which allows the whole interconnectivity of a system that once you enter that environment, that ecosystem, you can certainly rely upon the digital connectivity to get you everything that you need, and also to enhance our ability to connect with each other. Well, this quote was really interesting. The horse is here to stay, but the automobile is only a novelty and a fad. It was from the president of the Michigan Savings Bank when he advised Henry Ford's lawyer not to invest in the Ford Motor Company. Innovation happens, it comes on, we need to change things. Our vision at CLARA is to build the world's most livable, sustainable and connected cities. We need to do that in a way that enables people to have recreation, have amenity, and have cost of living pressures below what we're looking at the moment. It's got to be in a sustainable way. That's both environmentally sustainable, but also economically sustainable. So we're looking at models of cities as a service and those other things to enable that to happen and to deliver on the aspects of a true CLARA plan. Australia's got a problem, and the problem is that our cities are at capacity. We've got, both of our Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane are all under pressure from the growth that we're seeing, both from urban sprawl and from increasing population. CLARA is part of a solution to solve that problem, but we need to embrace the fact that we need a country of many cities, not just a country of mega cities. When we look at the United States, over tenfold the amount of population, yet only have about 5 cities over 1.6 million people. In Australia, we're about the same, and yet we've only got 25 million people. There is opportunity here to do it. We do need to overcome the tyranny of distance. Mobility will help us achieve that. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and open for some questions. Questions now, or do I go? Or? Okay.
Take a seat there, though, because we've got 3 speakers for this session, and then we'll do a panel discussion and take your questions at the end of our third, very brief speeches. Second one is Up, Up and Away, Skyportz, Uber Air and the Aerial Mobility Revolution. Clem Newton-Brown is the CEO and founder of Skyportz, regarded as one of the key figures behind the urban aerial mobility revolution. Clem's Skyport business is shaping the future of cities. Through Skyportz and his property consultancy, Whitemark, Clem is working with the industry to deliver the infrastructure that services such as Uber Air will require. I'm not sure whether you know this, but Uber has recently chosen to trial air taxis in Melbourne, one of only 3 cities to be recognised by the technology giant globally. Former construction and planning lawyer, Clem has also served as Deputy Lord Mayor of Melbourne as a member of the Victorian Parliament. Please welcome Clem, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks very much. First up, hands up if you think this Uber Air taxi idea is all bullshit. Never going to happen. Oh, my job's done. I don't need to talk to you then. You're all convinced. Look, I thought it was bullshit. 18 months ago, Uber came to Melbourne, and they were looking at Melbourne as one of 6 cities they're looking at choosing as an international test city to join Dallas and LA. I act for microflight helicopters, and we're having trouble getting government to talk to us. And so my business actually grew out of becoming a Trojan horse to get a seat at the table with Uber Air and government, and it worked. So we became part of the bid to try to get Uber Air to choose Melbourne, and the microflight helipad on the Yarra was part of that pitch. And as a result of that process, we ended up with Melbourne being chosen as the first international test city for Uber Air. So it's, I think there is going to be a really big shake-up. It's going to be the biggest shake-up in aviation that we've seen, both and also in mobility in terms of moving goods and people. We're going to have new types of aircraft, new types of propulsion, and new types of air traffic control. All these VTOLs, vertical takeoff landing aircraft, are being designed to be autonomous, although initially they will have pilots, probably just to get around that hurdle of public acceptance. So we're sort of at the very beginning of the stage now, and we're sort of at Wright Brothers stage. There's over 200 different designs of VTOLs. Many of them are flying. None of them are commercially certified yet. And there's basically no rules, no regulations in terms of how these new aircraft are going to fit into the ecosystem. So there's still a long way to go, but it is certainly coming. And the property industry has been caught flat-footed. We all work with large lead-in times to be designing projects, building projects, and this is all going to happen in the next few years. So if you're not thinking about it, now's the time to start thinking about it. So the dream of flight's been around for decades, and but now we're at the stage where there are some of the biggest aviation companies in the world which have entered this space. So Boeing, Bell, Airbus are the 3 big ones, and when I started looking into this, I called CAS and just like, this Uber Air idea, is it all crap or not? And they said, well, it's actually happening. We are preparing ourselves in Australia for this big shake-up in aviation, and there's so much money being put into these, the designs of these new aircraft by companies such as Boeing, Bell and Airbus, that CAS's view is that this is happening and they're getting ready for it. In terms of prototypes, if you go on YouTube, you'll see there are many aircraft which are already flying. The volocopter down on the bottom there just yesterday did its first piloted flight in Singapore. And these various other models, you can see they're all different designs. Everybody's just going out there and inventing the wheel, essentially. Some of them are simply rotors that go up and down. Others are more shaped like planes, so that when they reach altitude and start moving horizontally, they're in essence gliding or flying like a plane and using very little energy. Now, there's nothing all that space age about electric propulsion. We all think Tesla and Elon Musk has got this brand new idea, but before we had the uptake of the internal combustion engine and the mass production of cars, electric cars was what in the 1800s was what was developing, and they were very expensive. And interestingly, they were so expensive that they had a ride-sharing model back then. But with the advent of mass production of cars, the electric car fell by the wayside. So there's nothing particularly new about electric propulsion. This was the first electric flight, which was in 1973, and there's many companies now working on standard electric aircraft. So I think we're going to see across the board a very large change in the way that we power aircraft. The big issue is battery weight and battery life, but that's improving on a regular basis. Battery weight's coming down about 3% a year, and we need to come down a little further to become the same sort of weight to power ratio that jet fuel can provide. In terms of vertical takeoff and landing, there's nothing particularly new about that either. The military developed helicopters initially for the Vietnam War, and the Osprey and the Harrier are two old aircraft which were designed decades ago, which take off and land vertically. So nothing particularly new there. So what is the hold-up? I think we're at this stage now where all these technologies are converging to this one point where it is becoming truly viable. We can already take off and land vertically. We've got electric propulsion, which is becoming, the designs of that are progressing rapidly, and battery weight and battery life is coming to a point where it's viable. So all these points are converging, and we are almost there. The hardest part, I think, about this whole process is not the technology. The technology's there. There's some very smart people out there working on the technology. The really hard part about this is where you land them. The Uber Air model is fantastic in terms of the vision of getting people around cities. But at the moment, you've got one helipad in Melbourne. That's the only place you could land in Melbourne. No other city in Australia has a central city helipad. So until you've got the capacity to land VTOLs in more locations than helicopters, the Uber Air vision is going to be very difficult to achieve. And there's a lot of work that has to be done in terms of planning and regulations to get to that point. And a lot of it will depend on whether there's community uptake, the social license for, do we actually want these things flying around the skies? And if we do, then the politicians will be pressured to relax the rules to enable you to have your Skyportz on in every suburb. This is just a quote from the guy who's the head of urban air mobility at Airbus, confirming that point that the secret to this bottleneck is the infrastructure. In terms of designs, a number of designs have been done for Skyportz around the world, and Uber Air have largely led this and brought together the ecosystem. And I don't think there's Bill's one up there, but certainly Shop Architects have done a number of designs for Uber Air for these concepts. So these were put together for the last year's summit, and they were designed to have 1,000 landings an hour. The designs that were done for this year, and one of them was, this was the one done by Arup, who's my partner in Melbourne, and also Pickard Chilton, the architects. They designed that for Melbourne Docklands. Nowhere in the world has a Skyportz been built yet, and we are going to be at the forefront with, given Uber Air has chosen Melbourne. Delivery drones, I haven't got time to get into delivery drones, but this is another big area where you need to get on top of. We're going to have a massive revolution in moving goods around cities. The Google Wing project has been operating for about 4 years in Canberra. It's a fairly secretive project. It's very hard to get hold of them. They've cracked the nut with CASA with delivery drones. They've, in terms of being able to fly over people and fly out of line of sight. And they're the two things that prevent normal people going to JB Hi-Fi and buying a drone and delivering something. You're not allowed to go over people or out of line of sight. So they've cracked that nut. They've just opened up in Logan, in suburb of Brisbane, and they're now in the position where they could roll this out across the country. Now, I had a call from the guys at the Wing project yesterday who encouraged me not to promote their service. They don't want any phone calls. It's very hard to find a phone number, so please don't try. They don't want you to call them. They're basically not ready yet. They're in the process of just sorting out the technical issues, and it'll be some years before they're actually ready to talk to the property industry. But it's certainly something to consider. And I think what will happen is that with drone deliveries, it'll end up being that industrial estates will become, they'll all have their drone delivery service, so that they'll then attract tenants there. So Bunnings will want to come to your estate because you've got a delivery service that they can get that bag of nails out to a building site. And similarly with dark kitchens or cloud kitchens, with the Uber Eats type operations, they'll be able to operate in cheap locations and basically having kitchens centred around a delivery drone service. Amazon have a long-term aim of having warehouses and delivering by drone and within a 30k radius, and they have their own service which they're trialling called Prime Air. In terms of opportunities for the property industry, I think there's incredible opportunities for the property industry. As I've said, I think we have all been caught flat-footed. It astounds me that I'm the only one in Australia at the moment talking about drone and VTOL delivery, delivery of people by in the property industry, because this is real, and it's become very real now that Uber Air has chosen Melbourne. I think what will happen is that there will be Skyportz will end up being located in fairly regular locations to enable the service to progress, and the early opportunities are there for property developers to design Skyportz into their buildings. They might not be able to use them yet, use them as a bar or a function centre or a tennis court or whatever to begin with, but then you go back for your use permit a few years down the track. But if you're building a building now that's designed to last for 50 years, you really need to be thinking about this. And I think there's a lot of marketing opportunities there as well, because as I said, there's nowhere in the world that Skyportz have been built yet, and those first movers, it will be global news. I think that just in conclusion, we're at this stage now where we've got all the technologies coming together. We've got a property industry which hasn't really thought about it. We've got governments that have given us policy support. State government in Victoria and federal government is also focused on this, and we're at the stage now where we are ready to start moving on into actually building these Skyportz. Now, in terms of the early movers, yes, you are inventing the wheel. So my technical partner is Arup, and they've done some designs already in Skyportz, but in terms of the finer details, we don't even have an aircraft yet that's been certified, and there's potentially 200 out there. So we need to think about what it is that these Skyportz need to look like. And it's a bit like designing an aircraft carrier, where you've got lots of people and aircraft in very close proximity, and you're designing basically mini airports. So there's a lot of work to be done for those first movers, but Arup is very keen to get moving on this, as are others, and we welcome input from the industry, and we're very close to signing up the first couple of buildings in Melbourne, but certainly this is something which we are looking at expanding around the country. And ultimately, it won't be the case that people will own a building, will have a Skyport, and you'll phone up Uber and say, hey, do you want to rent my rooftop? Uber aren't interested in renting your rooftop, so again, don't call them either. They don't want to talk to you either. They're working on the aircraft and the flight systems, and they're some years away from needing the Skyportz facilities. And what will happen, I think, is that the Skyportz will be grouped together, and there'll be an operator who will basically run these mini airports, and that's how it will work. That people will join together as a network. I think that's probably my 10 minutes.
Thank you, Clem. I'm sure you've all got questions. I can't wait for some dodgy guy with his own helicopter with a 3-star rating to land in my next door neighbour's property by mistake. Interesting times. Our third and final case study before we get into the panel discussion, and you can get into lots of questions I'm sure you've all got, is about an urban rail renaissance, maximising city transformation through transportation. Kate Meyrick has more than 25 years in the property industry, and has worked throughout Europe and Australia, as well as Asia and the US, as an urbanist and placemaker. For more than a decade, Kate has been the Chief Executive of the Hornery Institute, a non-profit organisation specialising in community development, working alongside government, industry and community partners to create major urban infrastructure and regeneration projects nationwide. She's also been influential in shaping thinking about the global competitiveness of Australian cities, the future of Sydney Harbour Foreshore and the Sydney Midtown Central Station precinct. Please welcome Kate to the stage, ladies and gentlemen.
Basically, I think you should just have said I really love trains and I really love cities, or that I'm incredibly old because I've had 25 years worth of experience. Either way, that was a very long introduction. Thank you very much. I have a very simple message today. Intelligent investment in rail-led infrastructure has never mattered so much. And I say intelligent because it's not just the engineering solution that matters, it's the outcomes, how thoughtful we are about the outcomes that they can support, that really matters to the transformation of our cities. And I'd like to prove that today by using some examples that have been drawn from my own home city. So the accent probably gives it away, but this, ladies and gentlemen, is... London, absolutely. And all those bright lights to the north of the River Thames, they represent all the places that drive the economic powerhouse, the lifestyle powerhouse. The particularly bright flashes of light are the ones that are located around the places that have the densest public transport infrastructure. So they would be the City of London, the West End, and then right up there in the... There's probably a pointer, but I don't know how to make it work. Right up there in the corner, there's a big flash of light where King's Cross is, and there's another one over here where Canary Wharf is, and then ultimately out to Stratford at the Olympic Park. And I guess that's what's really interesting about this is that generally we can't go back in time to re-explore whether a different approach would have precipitated a different outcome for our cities. But in the case of London, we've had 5 major public transport policy generations in my lifetime. So it's really easy for us to almost get in a time capsule and go back and see how subsequent generations of city planners and transport planners have approached things a little bit differently. But there is an ascendant question, and that question is, why would you even bother? Let's just build a railway line. Well, increasingly, as we start to rely on a new world economy which is fueled by knowledge, innovation and ideas, we need to make sure that people and those ideas are able to move freely and rapidly around our cities. We've got to make sure that they can collide, they can come together, coalesce, collaborate and ultimately commercialise those ideas. And we're all pretty well aware of the fact that a great public transport network can enable our city to be more compact. It can create density in appropriate places. It can support urban agglomerations with great economic impact. But we probably don't think quite so much about the fact that it can also create greater social equity. And if we do it really skillfully and with a bit of flair, we can also add to the charisma and the character of the cities as we go along. Put really simply, if you're intelligent about the way that you leverage an investment in public transport, you're going to deliver a project that has enduring and extremely high environmental, economic, social and urban return. All the rest simply cost a great deal of money. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about 3 particular examples today of places that when I was a child were derelict, depressed, and actually, frankly, some of them were quite depraved as well. So we're going to talk about Canary Wharf, London Bridge and King's Cross. It's a picture of Canary Wharf. Some of you might know that King Charles used to keep the kennels for his Cavalier Spaniels, his hunting dogs, out here, and ultimately it became the Port of London. Bombed heavily in the Second World War, declined in the 70s when I was a little girl, and then closed ultimately in 1981 when containerisation took the port further downstream. And in 1981, we announced the London Docklands Redevelopment Corporation. Absolutely fantastic razzmatazz of incentives, tax breaks to encourage property developers and businesses to relocate out there. And we always understood that it was going to be important to have great transport. So we immediately delivered the Docklands Light Railway on an elevated track from Tower Gateway, and this is actually a picture from about 1987. The problem was that there was no overarching vision or master plan really for the Docklands area. So as a consequence, people jumped on this train, but there was nowhere to go and nothing to see, except the driverless train itself, and plenty of people just went to ride it. So progress had originally been pretty slow, and the game only really started changing when the Jubilee Line extension, under intense pressure from the developers who'd gone out there to the Isle of Dogs, came online at back end of the 1990s. And it was an extension of an existing connection on the underground that came from Westminster all the way out to Stratford. And it was a much more intentional procurement. So it foreshadowed not just opening up land for residential and commercial growth, but also for the development of overstation at Westminster, Portcullis House, and ultimately to create a new financial services hub on the Isle of Dogs at Canary Wharf. Even in my own ears now, remembering when that announcement was made, it felt ludicrous. I think it's also important to note that it also set up the conditions precedent for London to win the Olympic Games in 2012. Here's a picture, which I can actually remember because my first job was actually cycling around the London Docklands in the mid-1980s in my Laura Ashley skirt and my bicycle with no gears to look at development sites. I had no idea what I was doing, still probably don't. That's a picture of Canary Wharf at about that time. And of course, this is a picture of Canary Wharf today. But it was not a plain sailing. So the original developers of the now iconic One Canada Waters actually went bust, Olympia in New York, only 1 year after the project had opened. And here's a picture of the most recent, almost opened infrastructure that's going to support the next generation of the growth of this global commercial address, the Elizabeth Line. And I picked this picture because it's also an example of a very generous piece of public realm. So it's a winter garden inspired by Kew Gardens collection that's been open since 2015, sits above the top of the station, and provides a great local amenity as well as a draw card to Canary Wharf for people who've come for more destinational reasons. Here's a second example, London Bridge, a station I used to travel through quite a bit when I was a child. Actually, it's an agglomeration of 3 stations that were all built in the 1800s, although obviously this building wasn't. It was bombed in the war again. All I ever remember about this as a child was how delayed we were getting in because the station experience was terrible and the engineering solution was a tangle. So it's probably not surprising that come 2004, the now much more ambitious local authority in London decided that the London plan was going to see this as an area for opportunity and intensification, somewhere where tall buildings were totally appropriate. And this is the beautiful Grimshaw-inspired station with its very elegant engineering solution, its ingenious, its sleek lines and curves. And it should be noted that all of this transformation to a 75 million person handling station, which switched from terminating lines to through lines, was all done in a live operating environment without any of the services actually having to be cancelled or suspended for good. And here's the beautiful station box that undeniably connects the east to the west side of that particular railway infrastructure corridor, and that allows us to pass from the Greater London Assembly and the River Thames on one side through to St Thomas's Hospital and the University King's College on the other. It's about the same size as 3 Wembley Stadium football pitches. It's an architectural icon. Here's the Shard stuck across the top of it, but is it a generous democratic addition to London skyline? Probably not. You have to pay to go to the viewing platform, and the £50 million residential apartments at the top have barely been sold. But the thing that really offends me is the piecemeal placemaking solution. So the fact that we've got this London Bridge quarter that's stacked full of fantastic institutions, and the pop-ups just feel a bit scrappy and are not overly well used, and the public realm solution has failed to deliver a new signature urban place south of the river, yet. So let's move to King's Cross, undeniably the poster child for city-led transformation. And I think this picture was taken about the time of the late 1980s when I was working in London, actually not far away from here. I think what the approach enabled us to drive through the delivery of this King's Cross rail yard redevelopment scheme was intentionality. So it brought together transport thinking with community thinking with extremely bold long-range city thinking. The things that we often don't know about it is the strength of the economic cluster that's actually been enabled here around the station, where the digital technology, the arts and creative ecology has allowed businesses such as Google, Facebook, The Guardian, Expedia, the University College of Arts, which was actually the first building opened on the site, to set up a cluster that's enriched Midtown and created it as a destination with economic strength and lifestyle appeal. It definitely has international pulling power. This is actually the site that Google is going to be moving into sometime in the next couple of years, which I visited earlier on in the summer. But what I really love about this is it's a real place. It's a local place for local people to do real, local, authentic things. And even more importantly, it was actually created by co-created by local people being involved in the process of determining what public life they wanted from those public spaces. And at the same time, it's able to be a lifestyle destination. It understands how to program the combination of natural environment, heritage buildings in digital and analog ways that bring about very unexpected results and make sure that this place is alive throughout the year in many kinds of weather conditions throughout the day and make it an active evening destination for people to enjoy even when they're not catching a train. So what? Basically, in 10 minutes, I cannot translate all the things that I've learned about city-led transformation, but I can give you 10 lessons learned that you might remember and take away. So the first is we've got to be intentional because great things don't often happen by accident any longer, and value is rarely optimized without having a very solid plan. So we need to know how hard do we need these assets to work for us, and what does it actually have to achieve for our city and its community. We need to be really, really sure that the full value of any project is only going to be maximized when we fully integrate transport thinking with city thinking. It's really hard to retrofit the optimal urban outcome. We want to make the best use of these places because they are the most valuable, but we also have to understand that the highest and best use, which is very often residential, may not actually produce the longest and the best social or economic dividend. Sometimes that's expressed as an education, a culture, or a public realm use. Imagination. If you only remember one thing, please remember that these opportunities are incredibly precious and that we have this intense chance to take everything that is great about our city, use our imagination, our skill and our flair as a property sector to make places that are bold and brave and imaginative and not like anywhere else. We want these places to be inimitable and interesting. We want people to actually feel when they come here that it sits in their memory and they feel compelled to come back again. It'll always be slightly different every time they visit. We want them to be interwoven, so we don't want the last mile or the first mile of our journey to feel unsafe or difficult or difficult to navigate. We want to know exactly where we're going and exactly how we're going to get there in a seamless entry to a city that we either know well or we don't know at all. And we want involvement. I know it's scary to go out and ask people what they want, and we always imagine that the community will find it difficult to give us a coherent answer. But the reality is, it's people themselves who are the best placemakers and who make places their most interesting selves. And we want those places to be inclusive. We want them to be places that are generous of spirit, where you can become involved and there are very few barriers to entry. And more than anything, we want to make sure that these investments work really hard for their money, and that we're actually very certain what the full value range that we could capture through them might be, and that we make sure that that's what's valued. Because if we don't, we're not even sure what opportunity we've lost. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Kate. That was great, fascinating stuff. I'll just start with you, Nick. Thank you. I mean, we've been talking about this for a long time, and you mentioned about Australians, the clustering around the cities. We're sort of, for whatever reason, we don't like moving. Do you think we will move? Is it?
Yeah, well, I think we do move actually, and we're moving a lot. I don't think it's as big a concern that people won't move. They're looking for better lifestyles all the time. They're moving to either new urban growth areas or they're moving into infill developments. There's this love, there's a whole lot of people that didn't grow up in the inner ring of Sydney or Melbourne, but yet desire to live there and are willing to live there and compromise space, size of house, there's for amenity, close to schools, close to transport, close to hospitality. So I think the demonstration of people being willing to move if the amenity is there and the feeling is right is absolutely in existence right now. What we haven't got is that product of regional cities that offer those things. Our solutions at the moment is how do we find more places for people to live and therefore commute to work and maybe improve the commute rather than how do we create vibrant, livable, sustainable and connected cities that allow a nation to grow and be more efficient, more productive and much more enjoyable.
Do you think we'll get to the point where you build it and people will just come?
Well, I think it has to, but on the same token, it can't be a fanciful thing. It's got to, in our plan, there's $5.5 billion worth of upfront infrastructure that has to be put in place to enable people to come. Now, that's almost a reverse engineering of the current development model, which is build the houses, sell the houses, and then that'll cash flow some of that amenity later on. We have to do it in reverse if we're going to encourage people to come, and that means you start with the infill first, and you make sure that you've got the density right that has that balance with the amenity and recreation and the enjoyment factors to make sure we can deliver on that. But with that, and with the commitment to going ahead with that, you get a greater level of volume of sales. So the volume of sales over a 10-year time horizon more than offsets that upfront capital cost and that cost of capital to front load it and therefore deliver a much greater return for the investment.
I think it's a fascinating project. Clem, Uber started as a disruptor and disrupted an existing industry without worrying and went around regulation. There's a whole bunch of regulation with air travel. Are they in a good position to be able to navigate their way actually through regulation?
Well, look, one of the reasons why I thought Melbourne wouldn't be chosen is because they'd been blowing with the Victorian government over illegally starting their ride-sharing service. Basically, they paid the fines until such time as the community licence was so strong that the community, everybody had the app, everybody was using it, and government realised it was unstoppable. So they've got their own issues with dealing with the taxi industry now, but that was their model to come in and basically disrupt, and it was a people-led push, and the politicians caught up at responding to the people. Now, in my discussions with Uber, when they're looking at Melbourne, that's not their model here. Obviously, they can't just start putting things in the air and flying around. So they know they have to be starting at the very beginning and getting the aircraft certified and getting the changes through regulations and rules that would enable their vision to occur. So I think it's a very different approach that they're going to be taking with urban aerial mobility, but ultimately the success or the failure of that is going to depend on that community licence, because it's going to be a big upheaval. Do we actually want to see passenger drones buzzing around the skies? Do we want to see your neighbour getting their hamburger delivered to their front doorstep? Because it comes at a loss of amenity for people not in or using that service at that time. And I think ultimately it will. The noise is a big factor, and helicopters are noisy. People don't like them, they're expensive. But if you go onto YouTube, there was a video that was released recently from, I think it was the Vahana model, and they actually compared the thing in the air to a helicopter at a similar distance, and it was 100 times quieter. So taking off and landing, you'll hear them, but it won't be like a helicopter taking off and landing. And actually moving, you'll be almost imperceptible. So I think it'll be a bit like when trains and cars and trucks and roads started. People living on farms would have thought, well, I don't want all that noise coming past my house. But now it just becomes part of urban life. You've got all this activity happening. And I think that if the amenity is such that people want it, that we will get put up with it and get used to stuff in the skies.
Helicopters without pilots scares me. I like someone to be able to reboot them when things go wrong.
Yeah, well, most crashes in aircraft are due to pilot error, and all of these aircraft.
Better.
Yeah.
All these aircraft are being designed such that they are going to be significantly. They know they need to be safer than helicopters, safer than planes, and that's what they're all working towards. And I mean, you're quite right, and that's Uber's view as well. Is they're working with half a dozen manufacturers, and their brief is we want 4 passengers and a pilot. Now, all these aircraft are being built to be autonomous, and the reality is, I mean, if you're flying a helicopter into the helipad at Melbourne, you radio into Essendon Airport, and you say, I'm coming into here to land. You get clearance, you look around, you see what other helicopters are around. Now, if you've got 100 of these things buzzing around, it's not going to be safe to do it like that. So it's only going to work if it is autonomous, and you've got the safety of all the aircraft talking to each other. But autonomous vehicles, I mean, it's the same model people say about them, and we've had one person killed by an autonomous vehicle, I think, and that's almost killed the program. But everybody just ignores the fact that we get into a motor car today, and in Victoria you might be one of the 300 or so people who will die this year in a car, but with the new technology, they know they need to be significantly safer. But I think we still need to bear in mind that there is a risk with everything.
But people are going to want in and get in and spend $5 to get in a helicopter, aren't they? They're not going to.
So
They want it to be cheap. The expectation is that I can get a helicopter for $10 because that's what Uber has taught me.
Yeah, well, Uber, what they're saying is that it'll be similar to an Uber Black ultimately.
Yeah.
And I think that's achievable because the aircraft, I mean, helicopters are expensive because they're jet turbine engines and big props, and they have to have significant maintenance done on them, and a lot of fuel as well. And the VTOLs are going to be electric motors. Instead of overhauling engines, you probably just unbolt an engine and throw it in the bin and put in a new one. So not a lot of moving parts, so I think they'll be able to keep the cost of running the aircraft per hour significantly cheaper than helicopters. They'll be smaller and lighter. And then the other thing is the model is ride sharing. So it only really works if you're doing a ride sharing model. And Uber are trialling their app and their ride sharing in New York at the moment with their Uber Copter service. So instead of being charged $800 to charter a helicopter to the airport, you can buy a seat in that for $200. And so the ride-sharing model is what makes it work. And I think that Uber are very good at bringing the sort of the cool factor to what they do. And I tried Uber Pool for the first time when I was in Washington, and I thought, I've got plenty of time, and I'll just give it a try. And saved a few dollars on the trip. I got in the car, and someone sat down there, and they said, "Oh, hi, Clem." And I go, "Well, how do you know my name?" So it came up on their app that Clem's about to join you. And we had a chat about what we're doing, and everybody left having a positive experience. They connected with each other, and I think that's one of the things that Uber's bringing together is the whole ecosystem to change the way in which we move. Because at the moment, the thought of sharing a taxi, not many people would think, "Oh yeah, I'll share my taxi," but the thought of sharing your Uber with an Uber pool app is something which I think people are doing now.
Would have been a better story if he ended up in an orgy, I think. Just for next time, Clem, when you... Kate, this is what the value I think is interesting is that, they talk about we happily pay $4 for a cup of coffee, but that costs nothing, but we balk at paying $8 for a train that costs $1 billion. Why don't we value public transport in this country?
We don't have a culture of public transport. When I think about growing up myself, I think I was 5 when I first started catching a train. I didn't own a car until I was nearly 30 because I never needed to. So, and also because of the scale of the ridership, the cost was much, much more reduced. So it was actually cheaper to catch the train. It was faster to catch the train, and it was normal to catch the train, the underground. Never the bus. I'm not good in buses. But I think here we don't have the density of network, so the train you don't just arrive and the train comes 3 minutes later or 2 minutes later. And so by the time that we've discounted the speed, we've discounted the irritability of having to already get myself to the station, I might as well just stay in the car. It's no cheaper, it's no faster, and I don't have a culture of it.
But how do we change that?
Well, I guess that's a very long question. So one answer to that might be you stop people being able to bring their car on short trips or into the city. You apply road pricing taxation, other taxation models that says you simply can't bring your car here. So you are forced to take public transport. Or you make public transport free and you simply say, give it a go and see how it is. But more importantly, if there's no public transport, you can't catch it. So the reality is that however great a start the Cross River Rail stations are, we need a whole heap more Cross River Rail stations running from the east to the west of the city, the north to the south, making sure that connectivity here in Brisbane is ubiquitous.
Is there any of this sort of, because there's all this infrastructure going on at the moment, are there rail situations going on that excite you?
All rail situations excite me. But what really excites me is not actually the train, although I do post a lot of pictures of trains, and thanks to the 816 people who like my picture of the tram going down George Street.
Maybe you should try orgies on trains too.
I could see a lot of mileage in that down the track. But I think what is really exciting is not the train itself, it's what the transport enables, how we create these new places in our cities where people can come together to share, to work, to learn, to celebrate. That's what's really exciting, and it's what concerns me most is where we don't put that city thinking as part of our transport planning, then we just get underwhelming examples and we're inviting people to catch the train to nowhere.
I think it's interesting. In Sydney there's an interesting example of, I think, the bus that goes from the northern beaches, and everyone sort of hated the bus, and then they called it the B line and made a double-decker bus.
And everyone loved it.
They go, we're going on the B line. It's still a bus, but it's a different way of looking at it. We don't have time for questions. You can ask the guys when you're having is there pastries? I'm looking forward to a pastry. I'm just before we get into it, I'm going to remind you that the bathrooms are downstairs through there, and you've got to go down. For those who are old enough to remember the show Get Smart, it's a bit like that. Please thank our 3 guests. We'll see you in about 25 minutes for the next session. Thank you.